Hello and welcome everybody to the latest edition of our podcast on Making Connections, a handbook for effective formal mentoring programs in academia. Today I am here and honored to be here with the author of Chapter 11, Dion Kleba. And the chapter is called Preparing the Effective Mentee. If you've gone through chapter 10, you know that it was about preparing the effective mentor. And now we're going to focus on the mentee. And I want to tell you a little bit about Dion before we get started, because Dion is a human development specialist who designs engaging curriculum and professional learning environments for deep learning and far transfer. She consults in K through 12 and higher ed. She's developed a college faculty peer mentoring program, developed the resiliency bridge, co-developed the human learning systems instructional framework, and authors professional learning for faculty mentoring, K through 12 compliance, and STEM and esports curriculum. So hello, Dion, and welcome.
Hello, Tamara. Thank you so much for this opportunity. It's fun. It's great to talk about the work.
Well, I'm particularly excited to talk with you about this chapter. I found this chapter both challenging and provoking, and caused me to be really mindful and thoughtful about the mentoring programs that I have supported and facilitated and that I'm building. And I think a part of that is the richness of your background. So can you share a little bit with us about your background and how that's inspired the work that you are sharing with us today in this chapter?
Absolutely. Thank you. So I first have a bachelor's degree in music therapy. I am a musician. I continue to play these days. And in music therapy, one is using the structures of music, rhythm, form, tempo, dynamics, pitch, the timbre of the sound in various instruments. One is using those structures in order to create an environment in which somebody can learn, practice new skills, change, reframe what they're doing. And also regardless of their age. I've worked with children as well as adults, as well as with elderly people. And I've worked with people in various settings, whether they are in home settings, in educational settings, or if they're in a setting that has to do with their social, emotional, or cognitive capacities or limitations to those capacities. So there's a lot of research on the benefits of music and the connections between being a solid musician and being a strong learner, or being a person who knows how to practice in order to get better at something in order to achieve a goal that they have. So that part comes into mentoring because there's a lot of goal setting. There's a lot of practicing. We're not successful the first time we try something. And so that notion of practicing, being ready to get somewhere is employed in my approach to mentoring. I also have a degree in organizational development, which is the human side of business and business success. So this has to do not only with individual professional skills, but also team-oriented skills. And it has to do with the structure of the organization. What kinds of structures are there that people are interacting in, and how well do those structures align with the mission and the vision, the services and the products of the organization and their hiring practices. Because you can have an awesome organization, but just not know how to hire the talent that will fit that mission. Or you might have awesome talent, but it doesn't really fit the environment that you've set up. So those mismatches can be adjusted, actually. And the implication of that in a mentoring space is that the mentoring program structure can be designed. There's lots of choices. And you can decide that based on your outcomes. So if you know that you have a 10-year promotion mentoring program, then your structure needs to fit that somehow. There's a lot of ways to approach that. And then I also have my doctorate in learning and instruction. And so that's looking at the dynamics of the learning environment, the setting of the learning environment, and all different kinds of elements of learning. There's lots and lots about learning. And those are all the individual differences that a learner brings to the environment. And so basically, the more aware an educator or a facilitator is about these individual differences, the more they can adjust and accommodate to those individual differences in a way that's going to promote learning, smoother learning and smoother engagement, relationship-based learning and relationship-based engagement. And that holds very, very true with mentoring relationships. In mentoring relationships, the mentor is learning about the mentee and how to, oftentimes it feels like through trial and error, guide the mentee towards their own success based on their goals, based on their situation. But also the mentee is learning about themselves and learning about the mentor just as much as they're learning about the career pathways or how to get tenure. You know, what are some of the smooth approaches to actually following through on that particular goal attainment? So I weave all of those pieces together with, I guess, an interdisciplinary approach. And it creates I think, a very cohesive foundation for mentor program development, for mentor development, mentee development, and then associated assessment protocols for continuous improvement.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think sort of the common thread I see, right, in each of those disciplines is the centering of the human and the mindfulness that goes into the context and environment that we create for them to thrive, to be engaged. And I know as I was reading through your work, it caused me to think about the mentee and their experience in a much more holistic and thoughtful way. In many ways in mentoring, we I think we can all agree that most scholars and practitioners have accepted that we no longer think of the mentee as the empty vessel who receives the knowledge, and that we are being more thoughtful. But I think your work takes it even further. And so can you share with us sort of your view around what makes an effective mentee and how that connects to self-directedness and self-determination?
Absolutely. An effective mentee, coming from self-determination theory, which is my theoretical frame that I ground all of my mentoring work in. This is creating an autonomy supportive mentoring environment or an autonomy supportive mentoring program or space. And what that does, that environment perceives the mentee as having funds of knowledge, having ways of working. And that is the mentee's culture of self, for lack of a better way to say it. Well, the mentor brings those very same things to the table. So if the mentor-mentee relationship is transactional, just accomplish this checklist and I'll help you with the resources, then you don't have to get involved in who's who. But that's not what mentoring is. Mentoring is a relationship where both parties can benefit personally and professionally, but they also need to engage with each other personally and professionally. So this notion that I call is growing humans. That's all I care about, is growing humans. And so the mentor-mentee relationship is a really lovely space. So there's many, many soft skills for the mentors and the mentees to learn and apply. And the truth is that the mentee is starting wherever they're starting. The mentor is starting that relationship wherever they are. And together, it's where it is, whatever that starting point is. The mentee may not be very organized. And maybe the mentor is highly organized. And so with this approach, the mentor is going to an autonomy supportive approach. The mentor is going to be interested in what the mentee brings to the table, and then guide and shape the mentee's approach to whatever is being mentored toward in a way that works for the mentee. So the mentor has to be genuinely interested in who this person is. And the mentee, the preparation of the mentee needs to be for that type of exchange. That the mentor is not going to give you advice. They're not going to tell you what to do. They're going to work with you side by side. And the mentee has a lot of opportunities to reflect and to use their metacognition and self-awareness to figure out, well, am I ready for this? And then if not, how am I going to show up? How am I going to participate in that next mentor-mentee conversation? And how am I going to be honest about what I am or am not ready for? So there's self-awareness, there's self-disclosure that the mentee needs to be prepared to engage in, because their vulnerability, in a professional manner, of course, is going to inform the mentor about their areas of growth, their potential areas of growth. And this gives the mentor a lot of really valuable information for how they can then effectively guide the mentee. If the mentor doesn't know this information, or if they don't know how to assess or how to discover what the mentee's kind of status is with a particular element of the mentee's goals, then they're both lost. They're both kind of stuck, and it's uncomfortable.
So a couple of things come up for me that I want to ask you about, Deal, because one, we know throughout this book, there's some incredible examples that our authors share about mentor training and preparing mentors, and less about preparing mentees.
Mm-hmm.
And also with that, there's always this conversation around expectations.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I have all my sort of theories about expectations, but mentors often have expectations for mentees to be interested, to be engaged, to want to, be recipients of the experience.
Absolutely.
So how does your work help us better understand how a mentor can manage their expectations and how we prepare mentees for a mentoring relationship?
So that's a loaded question, and that's two loaded questions, right? Those are like really big questions, Tamara.
Yeah.
So from the mentor side, the expectations, it's important, I think, for the mentor to understand the difference between program expectations and their own expectations of the mentee, and to come clean with that. Because if it's a program expectation, they have shared responsibility to make that work, right? So they can rely on each other and they can partner to make that happen. The expectations for the mentees need to be aligned to the beliefs and the theoretical foundation and to the program outcomes for mentoring. So if it has to do with developing career success skills, if that's what the outcomes of the program are, then the mentor has opportunity to model and to promote these skills. Well, they can only do that to the extent that they can do that. Are they willing to learn more? Are they willing to engage in the mentor-mentee relationship as a laboratory for their own growth? And are they willing to be vulnerable and honest, or, inclusive of the mentee in that process for themselves? From the mentee's perspective, are they ready to be guided? Are they open-minded and open-hearted to receive guidance? Sometimes we're happy to ask for guidance and support, and then the things that are suggested to us, we actually aren't ready to take on. And if we are not, as mentees, able, for all the different kinds of reasons, could be psychological safety, could be efficacy, could be just one's own metacognition and one's own self-awareness, they may not be able to articulate that they're not ready. They may feel terrible that they're not ready. And so what happens? Often that's procrastination. And then the mentor is frustrated. Well, they didn't follow through. They didn't show up. And all of a sudden it's a behavior problem. But that's not the core issue. The core issue is the mentee's readiness, willingness, and ability to do what is expected of them. Just like in school, take algebra, right? How many of us did not do well in algebra at some point or another? Well, what scaffolds were available? And so part of the mentor's responsibility, I think, is to be able to read the mentee's situation and provide scaffolds for the mentee to be able to meet their goals and to participate fully.
So I love that example. I think that that's so key, because those of us who have experience in formal mentoring programs, and as folks will read in other chapters, is that it very often is the mentor experience that their experience as a mentee is behaviorally not engaged in the experience. And perhaps if we had different conversations with mentees, we would find out that it isn't just a desire to procrastinate or just a desire to not engage, but that there are other factors. And so I think your chapter and your thesis here is an invitation for people to think about the mentee in a different way, and to think about what they're bringing to the relationship in a different way.
Yes. And I think when you say what they're bringing to the relationship, that's both. What does the mentor bring to the relationship? That's their expectations of themselves, their expectations of the outcomes, their expectations of the mentee. Sometimes there's a lot of hidden bias or hidden expectations there. And it only emerges for the mentor when something goes wrong. Then they realize, oh, well, what's wrong with this? Why isn't the mentee that? Why isn't the mentee this? Well, the mentee is probably having the same experience. And in a trusting relationship, they can actually have that conversation. I had the expectation, this is what I'm experiencing. And this can be both of them or either of them to say this. And so what am I not knowing? What am I not seeing? And having a conversation where people can discuss their readiness, discuss their capacity, discuss the gaps, and to help the mentee. Part of the opportunity that the mentor has, I think, in this frame of reference is that the mentee is always developing. So you don't go from 0 to 60 in a semester. It's just maybe not possible for that particular mentee's context. So what are appropriate expectations? And those expectations have to adjust and readjust. That's part of being a self-directed learner, whether it's mentor or mentee. I say it's both, that they both need to be making adjustments to each other so that there's this continuous kind of guide, where they're walking and they're moving together side by side.
Yeah, I think that's incredible. One of the things that you talk about in your chapter are dispositions to discuss, and this idea of mentors listening and making themselves available for, you call them cooperative conversations. So can you help us frame that? Because I think sometimes mentors probably think they're asking the right questions.
Sure, they do.
But these dispositions, this idea of a cooperative conversation to find new suggestions or new strategies, what does that look like?
Well, it looks different with every pair because of who they are.
Yeah.
First and foremost. So if you and I were a mentor-mentee pair, it would look how it would need to look based on what I bring to the table, my perceptions, my gaps, my concerns, my strengths, and what you bring to the table. And specifically, it has to do with the interplay of those things. Right. So if we're at odds with each other, then cooperation has to have a little bit of a problem-solving nature. because there's something that's not working so well. But we may not be able to articulate what that is until we're in dialogue together. If something is working extremely well, it is very tempting to keep doing that same thing over and over again. But that may get stale. That may actually backfire because maybe the motivators, the inspiration for the mentee are about the novelty, something new, something different. And then that becomes familiar. So when the mentor is aware of the motivators at different levels for the mentee for different types of things, and in the chapter, I talk about these different types, qualities of motivation and how that impacts how we can inspire someone to take their next step. I can't motivate anybody. A person motivates themselves. What I can do is I can share things and I can be as inspiring as I can. It's up to you or up to whomever you're in conversation with to decide whether they're going to pick up on that and run with it or not.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of choice and a lot of volition. And the last thing I would say about these cooperative conversations is that there's a give and take about that. Yeah. Just because I want something for you, if I'm the mentor and you're the mentee, if I really, really want something for you, that doesn't mean that we're aligned with each other. I've got to find out. I've got to be patient. I've got to listen deeply to you. And I've got to be willing to let go of my expectations of a mentee, because I may find out that they're not ready for something, or they're not willing to do something, or they feel, like I mentioned before, they don't believe that it's possible for them. There's barriers, right? So that cooperative conversation is an environment in which we can learn more about each other, and then we can move forward together.
Yeah, I think when I'm listening to you, I can't help but interpret it through my lens of my experiences and what I understand about inclusion. And what you're talking about is like a really intentional, deep practice of inclusion, of really understanding an individual. And that means not a student, not an employee, not whatever title they have as part of the experience, but who they are and as an individual. So if you had 5 mentees, you're going to have really 5 entirely different experiences.
And 5 different relationships.
Yeah. And I can't help it. It's so fascinating for me as I've been reading the book, and perhaps this will happen for the other readers as I've been reading the book and having conversations. I have one professor that keeps popping up in my brain every chapter. And I keep thinking of all the missed opportunities, mostly on their part, of things that they could have said or done differently that would have moved them from being a professor who I attribute so much negativity to a professor who could have really inspired so much difference. And I think as we've been talking and understanding your work, it was that inability for that faculty to see me different from my peers, and that what they tried in their interactions with me was not appropriate for me. And as I continue to push back on being treated not the way I wanted or needed to be treated, it then began to just focus on my behavior, right?
That's the fallback, right? Yes. Because that's safe, that's familiar. And we know in academia, we're not judging the human, we're judging the behavior. We're not shaping the human, we're shaping the behavior. So we know that as a matter of course. Right. But who's responsible for changing the behavior? Well, the individual is. Right. You're responsible for changing your behavior. I'm responsible for changing my behavior. And so what stage needs to be set for the mentee in order to be ready, willing, and able to grow in that way.
And I think the beauty of that, which is core to inclusion and cultural competence, is we're both responsible for changing our behavior, right? I think of the number
Yes.
of trainings I've done with faculty where faculty have complained about students, and then I've given them all this information about cultural competence and inclusion. And they say, well, why should I change? Well, if both people change, you
And
get a different, right? You get a different result.
Yes. Yes, there's that old adage of, why on earth should you expect new outcomes from the same strategy?
Yeah.
I mean, really now. But our human nature hopes, it's very hopeful. Well, if I just change this one tiny little thing, then maybe all this wonderful big stuff will happen. Well, maybe not. So it is about inclusion. It is about understanding the impact of one person's approach or one person's presence on that relationship. And a truly inclusive relationship comes from being willing to understand the other. You don't have to accept or agree, but you certainly do have to work hard to understand. And if the mentee does not feel understood, why should they show up?
Yeah, really powerful. So let's talk about what this looks like programmatically. I'm building a program. What does this look like in terms of how I might build a program out where I am allowing and creating opportunity for mentees to be engaged in this idea of self-determination theory or autonomy supported mentoring?
Mm-hmm. So the 3 psychological needs that are addressed specifically in self-determination theory and in autonomy supportive practices are a person's autonomy, their volition, their choice, their opportunity, their sense of belonging. We all need to belong. We all need to choose and use our volition, but also our need to be competent. So all 3 of those elements are intentionally addressed in autonomy supportive mentoring. I only know about my work in autonomy supportive mentoring. There isn't anyone else doing this. So that's why in this chapter, I really laid it out as clearly and as stepwise as I could in terms of program development. And program facilitation. So what I advocate is this nested approach where the mentors know how to use autonomy supports in order to promote engagement, not only for their own engagement, but for mentee engagement. Mentees are experiencing autonomy supports in the mentoring relationship so that they then they see their competencies increasing. They see that their belongingness is feeling stronger and stronger. They experience autonomy firsthand and they can name it. So from a program perspective, I advocate a nested approach where the mentors experience autonomy supportive mentoring within their training, within the various program structures, and that the mentees do as well. So if you have a program that is fully autonomy supportive, you don't leave anybody out. So yes, you're going to have mentor training. We all know to have mentor training. I advocate for mentee training. Mentees need to be included. Mentees need to know how to engage, why, and how to assess their own motivations. It doesn't need to be this one directional. We keep talking about the mentoring relationship. So we need to run that this next step in an autonomy supportive space. And the third element is in the assessments and in the assessment protocols. Those also need to be autonomy supportive. So what type of choices Do mentors and mentees have to participate in assessment? Is it always, something that's in a survey that's online? Well, okay, but are there a variety of question stems? Are there a variety of responses? Because people are activated by different kinds of things. And how many types of assessment environments are there? Do mentors assess themselves and their mentees and the program? I hope so. Do mentees assess themselves, their mentors, and the program? I do hope so, because that's fully inclusive. And does the program manager or the administrator, do they also assess themselves, the mentors, and the mentees, as well as the program structures and the communication strategies and, the metrics of the program attendance and those kinds of things? Is all of that built in? If it is, then you have a very full assessment protocol. One of my favorite strategies for program assessment is a focus group, where the mentors have a focus group and the mentees have a focus group, same questions for both groups. And then the mentors and mentees together participate in another focus group, because the dynamics will shift and the interplay and the dialogue will shift. You can't have the mentees voice only by themselves. If that mentee voice is in concert with the mentor, different things are going to come up just because of those relationship dynamics and because of those roles of mentor-mentee. And I also did a focus group where it was myself as the program designer and program manager with the mentees. And so what we did, because of the power differential, they first did some written responses, and then and I collated those. I did content analysis. I just summarized everything into themes, and then I presented the mentees with that data. And I asked for a conversation about the data and the themes. They were very empowered to talk about that data.
Yeah.
Because it was not personal.
Yeah.
And at the same time, they had participated in these other assessment opportunities. And so they knew that their voice mattered. It wasn't just, fill out the checklist because it's a transactional to-do item. It was, no, Dr. Claybaugh really does want to know so that she can find out how to improve this program.
Yeah.
So that's inclusive practices, and that's also a self-determination theory approach where we're applying the autonomy supportive constructs to feedback.
Yeah, that's incredible. I think your work is elevating what we're doing in mentoring. I think it's encouraging us to think more deeply and holistically about the mentee and the mentee experience in the mentee relationship, and giving us some real guidance and framework on how to do that. And so I know I will be rereading your chapter. And additionally, you have a case study, the first case study in chapter 18, that walks us through a more detailed programmatic example of your work.
Mm-hmm.
So for folks who are listening, who are as excited and encouraged as I am, there's a wealth of information in your chapter and in your case study. And I am selfishly thinking about my own work and my own experiences, but knowing that hopefully in my selfishness that my questions are questions that other people have. So as we sort of wrap up our conversation, if I am thinking about applying this approach to the mentoring work that I am doing, what is something that I must have as part of using this framework?
I think that you must want everybody's voice. genuinely. You must want to know what everybody is experiencing. And you must also be willing to act on the meaning that you make of what everybody is experiencing. It is very easy to collect the data, enjoy the focus groups, and do nothing. And that is not going to get you as an individual, whomever the you is in this case,
Right.
anywhere. So what is not negotiable is to have people who are willing to learn. I would not ever compromise that. If a person wanted to work with me to build a program, then they must be open to learning themselves about people, about themselves, about their university or their institution or their organization, because you can't not learn, and yet you can ignore what you learn.
Right.
And that's not going to fly.
Yeah. Yeah. So what would be something that would be a nice to have? If I can't have everything, what's something that's a nice to have?
I think that when mentors and mentees attend training together, there's other ways to do it, but there are so many benefits. Incidental learning happens that nobody can predict.
Right.
So I think that it's really nice to have opportunities for the mentors and the mentees to be together, whether that's focus groups, whether that's dinners or lunches, whether that's brown bag opportunities for training. There's all kinds of things that can be done.
Yeah.
But that's really, really nice to have.
And so as we advance in our thinking about the mentor-mentee relationship and how we center everyone's humanity and learning experience in these relationships, what can we start to live without?
Well, we can live without bias. I know I'm answering the other side of the coin, I'd say, because there's nothing that we can live without. If we really want to do this well, then we really are growing ourselves and each other.
Yeah.
And so we can live without bias. We can live without inappropriate expectations, meaning expectations that we haven't checked. They're not realistic.
Yeah.
We certainly don't need to have expectations that don't have scaffolds or don't have some reality attached to them. That's just failure.
Yeah.
So
I love that.
I know I flipped that on you, but
no, but it's great, right? I think one of the things that as leaders, as mentors, parents, consultants, we have expectations for folks. But I have an incredible mentor in my life who has shared with me this gold for years, that expectations are nothing more than premeditated resentments.
That's tight. Wow. Thank you for giving me something new to think about.
Right.
Wow.
And I mean, it's because that's what you said. We're setting folks up to fail when we have a set of expectations we haven't checked. And
Yes.
so I think that's so critical that we come into a mentoring relationship as mentors and mentees with some clarity on what our expectations are and talk about them and figure out how realistic they are. And at the same time, recognizing if you have a brain, you have bias. Bias doesn't belong to just bad people. It belongs to all people with brains.
Yeah.
And we can't mitigate it. We can't account for it if we don't recognize it. And so part of this is bringing light to things that we normally keep pretty close to our chest, so to speak.
I agree with you, Tamara. I think that when there are courageous conversations, there's a couple of frames of reference that one can hold in order to participate equitably in those conversations. And that is that frame of, I want to understand. I don't have to agree. I don't have to do it myself, but I certainly want to understand. Right. And that desire to understand is a bridge.
Yeah.
And that's a bridge for inclusion. And that's a bridge for relatedness, right? Which is one of the tenets of autonomy supports and self-determination theory, that willingness to engage in an authentic way that is honoring of that person's funds of knowledge. I can't judge anybody else if I haven't walked in their shoes.
Right.
And I don't know the first thing about their walk if I haven't listened to them. So who am I to put an expectation over somebody?
Right.
Who am I? Right. Yeah. I think the expectations at a program level, okay, fine, those are neutral. We all follow those. But otherwise, let's talk that out and let's make sure that the expectations are viable, that they're relevant.
Well, I just cannot, there is an endless wealth and depth of learning to be done from you and your work. I am excited for what folks glean and capture and integrate from what you have shared and from our conversation today. Thank you so much for the work that you have done and the programs you're supporting and building across industry and in higher ed. I think there's so much to take from what you are bringing to the conversation and scholarship on mentoring. So thank you for your work. Thank you for contributing to the book. And thank you so much for our conversation today, Dion. It has been an absolute joy. And for our listeners, please make sure not only to read the chapter, but to also go to the case study. I think you'll find it equally enriching. So thank you so much, Dion.
Tamara, thank you for the opportunity. Your questions get me thinking in new ways and make me want to do some more writing. So thank you, double and triple. I appreciate the opportunity very much.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for listening and watching today. We'll see you in our next episode.